The wind howled mercilessly across the frozen wilderness, its icy breath cutting through the thick forest like shards of glass. In a secluded cabin nestled amidst snow-covered trees, a solitary man sat by the crackling fireplace, savoring the fragile warmth against the brutal cold outside. Life here was simple but lonely, a self-imposed exile after years of heartbreak. Suddenly, a loud thud shattered the quiet, followed by a deep, guttural sound that sent chills down his spine. Hesitant, he approached the frosted window and froze in disbelief. There, on the porch, stood a massive bear, its fur matted with snow, its body trembling violently. Its eyes weren't wild or predatory, they were pleading. For a moment, man and beast locked gazes, a silent understanding passing between them. Against his better judgment, he unlatched the door. What could drive a creature so fierce to beg for refuge? What happened next would change his life forever. The man's heart pounded as he stood at the doorway, the freezing wind biting at his face. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the sight before him, a bear, massive yet pitiful, barely standing on its trembling legs. Its fur, once thick and protective, was now clumped with ice and dirt, patches missing entirely to reveal raw, frost-bitten skin beneath. The creature's chest heaved with labored breaths, every exhale forming a misty cloud in the bitter air. This was no predator. It was a being on the brink of collapse, desperately clinging to life. The man's instincts screamed to close the door. Every story he had ever heard about wild animals, especially ones as powerful as bears, played vividly in his mind. But there was something in the animal's eyes that stopped him. A quiet plea, a look of desperation so profound it pierced through his fear. Those eyes weren't wild or angry. They were tired, filled with a sorrow he couldn't ignore. Still, his hand hesitated on the doorframe. Letting a bear into his house? The thought was insane. What if it turned on him? What if this was some sort of trap, an instinctual ruse before the attack? The bear swayed slightly, its massive frame wobbling as if it could collapse at any moment. It let out a sound, not a roar, but a low, mournful groan that seemed to resonate deep in the man's chest. The sound wasn't threatening. It was a cry for help. He felt a pang of guilt stab through him as he stood there, debating. He was alone out here, miles from civilization, with no one to consult. Whatever decision he made, he would have to live with the consequences. "What are you doing?" he muttered to himself, stepping back from the doorway. But as he started to close the door, the bear took a step forward, then another, before collapsing onto the porch with a heavy thud. It didn't try to force its way inside. It didn't growl or bare its teeth. It simply lay there, a giant frozen heap, its breaths coming in shallow, uneven gasps. The man's resolve cracked. He couldn't just leave it there to die, not like this. Cursing under his breath, he grabbed a heavy blanket from the chair by the fire and cautiously approached the doorway. "Stay," he said firmly, though his voice trembled. He wasn't even sure if the bear could understand him, but it didn't move. Its eyes, half-lidded and glassy, watched him weakly. He stepped onto the porch, the snow crunching under his boots, and draped the blanket over the bear. It flinched slightly at the contact, but otherwise didn't resist. Its body radiated a faint heat beneath the cold and ice, but it was clear the animal was losing its battle against the freezing weather. The man stood there for a moment, staring down at the creature. It was enormous, even in its weakened state. He'd never been this close to a bear before, and the sheer size of it was intimidating. He could see the powerful muscles beneath its matted fur, the massive paws tipped with claws that could tear through flesh and bone with ease. And yet, here it was, helpless and vulnerable, trusting him in a way that felt almost unnatural. He took a deep breath and made his decision. "All right," he said quietly, more to himself than the bear. "All right, but if you eat me, I swear I'll haunt you." The process of getting the bear inside was nerve-wracking. The man worked slowly, speaking softly to the animal as he dragged it across the threshold and into the warmth of the cabin. The bear's body was heavy and unyielding, and he had to stop several times to catch his breath. Every time he paused, he half expected the bear to lunge at him, but it remained passive, its energy too depleted for any sort of aggression. Once inside, he eased it onto an old rug near the fireplace, careful to avoid its claws and teeth. The heat of the cabin seemed to revive the bear slightly. It let out a deep, rumbling sigh and shifted its massive head to look around. The man watched it warily, keeping a safe distance as he tended to the fire. He added more wood, stoking the flames until they roared, filling the room with a comforting warmth. The bear's eyes followed his movements, but it made no attempt to rise. It was still too weak, its body shaking occasionally with tremors as it began to thaw. The man wasn't sure what to do next. He wasn't a vet, and he certainly didn't have any experience caring for a wild animal, let alone one as dangerous as a bear. But he couldn't just sit there and do nothing. He rummaged through his supplies, pulling out a first aid kit, a few old towels, and a bucket of warm water. Approaching the bear cautiously, he began to clean its wounds, wincing at the sight of the deep gashes and frostbitten patches. The bear flinched at his touch, but didn't resist, its breathing slow and steady as he worked. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly as he cared for the creature. He spoke to it softly, more to calm himself than the bear, telling it stories about his life, his reasons for living out here in isolation. He told it about the family he'd lost, the mistakes he'd made, and the pain that had driven him to this lonely cabin in the middle of nowhere. The bear, of course, didn't respond, but there was something strangely comforting about its presence. It listened in silence, its dark eyes watching him with an intensity that made him feel like it understood every word. As the hours passed, the bear began to show signs of improvement. Its breathing grew steadier and the trembling subsided. The man felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe he could save it after all. But there was still a lingering fear in the back of his mind. What would happen when the bear regained its strength? Would it remember his kindness, or would its instincts take over? He tried not to think about it, focusing instead on the task at hand. The night wore on, and the storm outside grew fiercer, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was strangely peaceful. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the room, and the man found himself dozing off in his chair, exhaustion finally catching up to him. He awoke to a sound, a low, rumbling noise that made his heart skip a beat. His eyes snapped open, and he froze, staring at the bear. It was awake, fully awake, and it was staring back at him. For a moment, neither of them moved. The man's mind raced, adrenaline surging through his veins. Was this it? Was this the moment the bear would attack? But instead of lunging at him, the bear let out another low rumble, almost like a purr. It shifted slightly, curling its massive body closer to the fire. The man let out a shaky breath, relief washing over him. Maybe, just maybe, they had reached an understanding. As the days passed, the man and the bear settled into an uneasy routine. The bear's strength slowly returned, and with it came a new challenge: food. The man's supplies were limited, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could sustain both himself and the bear. But he couldn't bring himself to turn it away. Not after everything they had been through. He began rationing his meals, hunting and foraging when the weather allowed, doing everything he could to keep them both alive. Despite the hardships, there was a strange sense of companionship that grew between them. The bear, once a symbol of fear and danger, became a source of comfort. It followed him with its eyes as he moved around the cabin, its presence a constant reminder that he wasn't alone. And for the first time in years, the man felt a flicker of something he thought he had lost forever: hope. But even as their bond grew, there was always a part of him that remained cautious. This was still a wild animal, and no amount of kindness could change that. He knew that eventually the bear would have to leave, that their time together was only temporary. And yet, he couldn't help but wonder what had brought it to his door in the first place. What force had driven it to seek shelter with him, a solitary man in the middle of nowhere? As the days stretched into weeks, the cabin became more than just a place for survival. It became a sanctuary. The wind howled outside, and the world beyond seemed to fade, leaving the man and the bear in a strange isolation that mirrored each other's lives. The bear, though once an untamable beast, had softened, its primal instincts tempered by an odd trust. The man, too, had softened in the presence of the bear. He began to talk to it, a habit born out of his desire for connection. At first, the words were simple. "It's cold today, isn't it?" he'd say, glancing up at the bear as he prepared its food or cleaned its wounds. He spoke out of habit, used to the silence that filled his life. The only company he had before the bear arrived were his thoughts and the wind whispering through the trees. But the bear, in its own quiet way, began to respond. It was subtle, an ear twitch when the man spoke, a slight shifting of its head when he moved. Sometimes, when the man entered the room after a long day of work, the bear would lift its head and watch him with wide, intelligent eyes. The gaze wasn't one of fear or aggression. It was almost curious. Over time, the man began to feel that the bear wasn't just waiting to be fed. There was an understanding there, a shared space between them that transcended mere survival. At night, as the man sat by the fire, he'd tell stories. Stories of his past life before the isolation, of friends long gone and the world beyond the cold. Sometimes, he'd just speak his thoughts aloud. "I wonder if you'd ever been this close to a man before," he mused one evening, his voice drifting into the warm air. "I bet you're used to being in the wild, free to roam where you please." The bear, lying nearby, seemed to understand. It let out a low rumble, the bear equivalent of a sigh. It was as though it were acknowledging his musings, offering some silent response. The man chuckled, shaking his head at his own thoughts. "I suppose I've gone mad, talking to a bear," he said, but the words felt less absurd now. The bond that had formed between them had shifted, evolved into something deeper, an unspoken friendship built on trust and a shared silence. The man had always been used to solitude, but there was something about this companionship that felt different. In the bear's presence, he wasn't alone, not in the way he had been for so long. He was beginning to realize that, perhaps, they both needed each other in this strange moment in time. The bear needed care and shelter, and he needed to feel the presence of another living being, something larger than the snow and cold that dominated his life. One evening, as he tended to the bear's wounds, something strange caught his attention. The bear had been injured when it arrived. Its side and shoulder had been gashed, and frostbite had taken a toll on its paws. The man had carefully cleaned and bandaged the wounds, trying his best to ease the animal's pain. But now, as he worked on the bear's fur, something new appeared, an odd, circular mark that hadn't been there before. It was faint, barely visible against the bear's thick fur, but the man's eyes were drawn to it, a sensation of familiarity nagging at him. At first, he thought it might be a wound, perhaps a scar from a previous injury. But as he parted the bear's fur more carefully, he realized it wasn't a scar at all. The mark was too neat, too deliberate. It was like a symbol, etched into the bear's skin, almost as though it had been branded. The man's heart skipped a beat. What was this? He gently ran his fingers over the strange mark, feeling the raised edges of it. There was something about it, a quality that seemed otherworldly. It wasn't the kind of mark that a wild animal would bear. This felt purposeful, as though it held meaning. He had seen similar marks before, but only in ancient texts or forgotten artifacts. A sign, a symbol that humans had used to communicate across time and space. The bear, sensing his change in demeanor, lifted its head and watched him closely. The man paused, taking a deep breath. He felt as though he were on the edge of something. The discovery of this symbol wasn't a simple curiosity. It was something more. Something that connected the bear to a world far beyond the wilds it had wandered from. "Where did you get this, huh?" the man muttered, almost to himself. The bear let out a low growl, not out of aggression, but as though it was acknowledging his question. The man's thoughts raced. He had known something about this bear felt different from the beginning. There had been an intelligence in its eyes, a kind of awareness that didn't align with the typical behavior of wild animals. But this was something else. The man went to his shelves and began rifling through old books, notes, and scraps of papers he had gathered over the years. He'd once been a man of the world, a scholar even, before the isolation had taken hold. As he leafed through the pages, he found references to similar symbols, ancient markings used by lost civilizations, protective symbols used by shamans, or marks left by creatures in myth and legend. Could it be that this bear was more than just an animal? Was it carrying with it a piece of something larger? In the dim light of the cabin, the man felt the stirrings of a revelation. Perhaps the bear was not simply a wild animal lost and injured in the wilderness. Perhaps it had come here for a reason, a purpose far beyond anything he could comprehend. But what was that purpose? Was it merely seeking shelter and care, or was it carrying a message? Days passed, and the man's thoughts became consumed with the mark on the bear. He couldn't shake the feeling that the bear's appearance was no accident. There was something important about it, something that needed to be discovered. He spent more time researching, poring over his old books, trying to make sense of the symbol. But despite his best efforts, the answer remained elusive. The mystery only deepened, and with it, the bond between the man and the bear grew stronger. One evening, as the man sat by the fire, lost in thought, the bear did something unexpected. It shuffled closer to him and, with a surprising gentleness, nudged his hand with its large, furry head. The gesture was subtle, but it felt significant, almost as though the bear was asking for something more than just food or warmth. It was asking for trust. The man slowly lowered his hand and began to gently stroke the bear's fur, the warmth of the fire flickering in his eyes. It was then that he realized something profound. The bear wasn't just a wild animal in need of care. It was a creature with a purpose, and somehow that purpose was tied to him. Whether it was fate or coincidence, he didn't know. But he felt an undeniable pull toward this animal, and the mystery that surrounded it. "What are you trying to tell me?" the man whispered, looking into the bear's eyes, searching for an answer. For the first time in a long while, the man felt like he wasn't just helping the bear survive. He was part of something much larger. The bond between them had transformed from simple care into something deeper, something that transcended words, beyond the physical injuries or the frozen landscape. The bear had a message, and it was only a matter of time before the man discovered what that message was. As the days passed, the man's curiosity grew. The connection between him and the bear was undeniable now, but there was something more in the bear's eyes, something that had begun to gnaw at the man's thoughts. Why had the bear come to him? Why, of all the places in the world, had it sought shelter in this isolated cabin? It wasn't just a simple accident. This wasn't a bear simply lost or injured. It was as though the animal was on a mission. The man had been following the subtle clues, the strange marking on the bear's side, its unusual behavior, its trust in him. And he started to piece together a story, one that seemed both impossible and yet undeniable. It wasn't until the bear, one night, took the first deliberate step toward revealing its true purpose that everything began to make sense. It happened in the dead of night, when the cabin was bathed in the flickering glow of the fire. The bear, lying on the floor near the hearth, suddenly rose, its muscles rippling under its thick fur. It approached the man quietly, its large, intelligent eyes gleaming in the dim light. The man had learned to recognize the bear's moods, and something about its demeanor now made him feel that this moment was different. The air was charged with an unspoken urgency, and the man's heart began to race. The bear's gaze locked onto the man's face, and for a moment it was as though the animal was waiting for him to make the connection. Then, with a soft grunt, The bear turned its head toward the door. It didn't move to leave, but the message was clear. The journey wasn't over yet. The bear sat down in front of him, its massive form towering in the low light. Then, in a move that startled the man, the bear slowly extended one large paw and gently placed it on a small pile of papers that had been sitting on a nearby table. It wasn't a random gesture. It was deliberate. The paw nudged the papers aside, revealing a small scrap of parchment hidden beneath them. The man blinked, unable to believe what he was seeing. The parchment wasn't just any piece of paper. It was old, faded, and covered in symbols that matched the strange mark on the bear's side. The man's hand trembled as he picked it up, turning it over in the firelight. As his eyes scanned the symbols, a chill ran down his spine. These were not just random markings. They were part of a map, one that led somewhere important. The man's mind raced. He had always believed in the wilderness as a place of survival, where nature was indifferent to the struggles of man or beast. But this was something entirely different. This was a secret, a hidden truth that the bear had brought to him, something tied to the very fabric of nature itself. The bear wasn't just seeking shelter. It was on a mission, one that had brought it across impossible distances, through snowstorms and freezing temperatures, to find him. "What is this?" the man whispered to the bear, though he knew there was no real answer the creature could give. The bear's response was subtle, yet unmistakable. It lowered its head slightly, as if acknowledging that the man was finally beginning to understand. The parchment wasn't just a map. It was a clue to something the man had never heard of, yet somehow felt he had always known. It depicted a series of landmarks, a hidden path through the wilderness, and a final destination that seemed impossibly far away. The map wasn't merely a guide to a physical place, it was a map to an ancient truth, a force tied to the very earth itself. The man looked down at the symbols, a growing realization dawning on him. This was no ordinary bear. This was a creature sent to deliver a message, one that had been passed down through generations, perhaps through millennia. The symbols on the bear's body, the markings on the parchment, the bear's behavior, it all pointed to one thing: an ancient ritual, a secret that had been hidden for ages, a secret that could change everything. The bear's purpose, the man now understood, was not just to seek help for itself or its cubs. It had come to him because he was part of something larger. He had been chosen. There was a connection between them, a bond formed by destiny, not by chance. The bear had been sent not just to survive, but to find him, to awaken something within him that had been dormant. The next few days were filled with a quiet tension. The bear seemed to grow more restless, its behavior increasingly urgent. It no longer simply lay by the fire. It paced, looking toward the door, as if waiting for something. The man, too, felt the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. He couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just a strange occurrence, it was a call to action. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the cold winds began to howl outside, the bear did something that left no doubt in the man's mind. It walked over to a corner of the cabin where the man had stored his old hunting gear. There, in the dim light, it nudged one of the man's rifles with its paw. The bear looked at him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. Then, with surprising gentleness, it pawed at a small bag of supplies, ropes, tools, and food that the man had prepared for emergencies. It was clear now. The bear wasn't just trying to survive. It was preparing for a journey that the man had to take with it. The bear had shown him the way, and now it was time to move. Whatever was waiting at the end of the map, whatever secret the bear was leading him to, the man had no choice but to follow. The decision weighed heavily on him. The map promised answers, but it also promised danger. He would have to leave the safety of the cabin, venture into the harsh wilderness, and follow the bear into the unknown. But deep down, the man knew that he was part of something much larger than himself. The bear wasn't just guiding him, it was showing him his true path. In the days that followed, as the man and the bear prepared to leave, the air between them was thick with unspoken understanding. They were no longer two separate beings, struggling to survive in the frozen wilds. They were partners in something greater, bound by the mysteries of the world and the call of a force that neither could ignore. The final revelation came one morning, just as they were about to set out. The bear, with an almost knowing look in its eyes, padded over to the man and sat beside him, its large body warm against the chill of the air. It let out a soft growl, a sound that, in that moment, felt like a blessing. The journey was about to begin, and the man knew that, together, they would uncover the truth behind the ancient mystery, whatever it was. And as the man prepared to follow the bear into the wilderness, he understood that this was not just a simple journey of survival. It was a journey of discovery, a journey that would change everything he thought he knew about the world, about nature, and about the bond between human and beast. The day had come. Though the skies were clouded and a bitter wind swept across the barren landscape, the man knew there was no turning back. He and the bear stood at the edge of the forest, the trail marked by the ancient map now clear in the snow. The journey ahead was long and uncertain, and though the man had made his decision, he couldn't shake the weight of the choice that lay before him. The bear's restless pacing had turned to stillness, its massive body poised and alert, waiting for the man to catch up. There was something different about the bear now. Its movements were deliberate, as though it understood the magnitude of the path ahead. Its eyes flickered briefly toward the man, an unspoken bond between them. The bear was no longer just an animal. It was a guide, a companion, and a symbol of something far greater than either of them could fully understand. The map had led them this far. It showed the location of a hidden valley deep within the mountains, an area where the land itself seemed to pulse with a strange energy. But the more the man studied the symbols and markings, the more he realized there was something more, something dark and dangerous. A shadow had been cast over their journey. There were warnings etched into the map, symbols of caution, of threats, of things that even the bear seemed to fear. The deeper the man ventured into the wilderness, the more he began to understand. It wasn't just the bear's cubs it was trying to protect. It wasn't just the bear that was in danger. The entire valley they were heading toward was under threat, from something far more powerful and ancient than anything the man had ever faced. The bear had been fleeing from an enemy, an entity that had hunted it across the cold expanse of the wilds. And now, the man and the bear were being drawn toward this danger, helplessly entangled in the aftermath of an ancient struggle. The wind howled louder now, carrying with it the scent of something wrong. The bear's nose twitched, its ears flattened against its skull, and its eyes darted back toward the man. There was a heaviness in the air, a thick, foreboding pressure that pressed down on the both of them. The journey had brought them to the threshold of something monumental, a revelation that would change everything. Suddenly, there was a distant, guttural growl that reverberated through the trees. The man froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The bear's posture stiffened, its fur bristling, and it growled low, a sound of warning. Something was coming, something far worse than either of them could have anticipated. The man's breath caught in his throat. The growl wasn't from the bear. It was too deep, too unnatural. A sense of dread settled over him. This wasn't a wild animal hunting to survive. This was something else, something that had been stalking them. And then there was a flash in the distance, movement, too fast to track. The man's instincts screamed at him to run, to leave this place before it was too late, but his feet remained rooted in the snow. He looked to the bear, whose gaze met his with urgency. This was no longer about survival. It was about the larger threat. The bear's eyes told him everything. They weren't just fleeing danger anymore. They were facing it head-on. The man knew the truth now. The purpose of the bear's journey was far greater than he could have imagined. It wasn't just about seeking help or protecting its cubs. The bear was part of something ancient, a force tied to the earth itself. And this force had been awakened, threatening to consume everything in its path. The growl grew louder, closer, and the man felt the weight of the decision he had to make. The trail ahead was treacherous, but they were running out of time. The danger was almost upon them, and the man had to choose. Would he follow the bear further, risking everything, even his life, to uncover the truth? Or would he retreat, abandoning his companion and the ancient mystery that had begun to unravel around them? He glanced at the bear, whose eyes met his again. The bond between them was unspoken, but undeniable. The bear wasn't just asking for help, it was asking the man to join in the final battle, to face whatever had been stalking them across the frozen landscape. It was a choice that would change everything. Then the first creature appeared. It emerged from the shadows of the trees, a massive, shadowy figure. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its movements were unnervingly swift. The man's blood ran cold as he realized what it was. It wasn't an animal. It was something darker, something tied to the land's ancient power, a creature of myth and legend. The map, the warnings, the symbols, it had all led to this moment. The creature let out another low growl, and the air itself seemed to tremble with its presence. The man's heart raced. The beast was enormous, its fur matted and black, its teeth sharp and gleaming. It was a predator, but not one of this world, a creature that had come to claim the land, to erase the ancient balance that had been protected for centuries. The bear let out a deafening roar, stepping forward protectively in front of the man. It was clear now. This was no ordinary animal. The bear wasn't just a creature of the wild, it was a guardian, a protector of something far greater. And it had brought the man here not to hide from the danger, but to face it, to restore the balance that had been threatened. The man felt his pulse quicken as the creature advanced. The choice was clear now. There was no turning back. With a final glance at the bear, the man made his decision. He stepped forward, ready to face the creature that loomed before them. The bear snarled, preparing for battle, and the man knew that whatever happened next, it would be a life or death struggle. In that moment, the man understood the full weight of his decision. This wasn't just about survival. It was about restoring the balance that had been disrupted, about protecting the Earth's ancient power from those who sought to destroy it. He had chosen the path of sacrifice and bravery, the path of standing alongside the bear, no matter the cost. The creature lunged, and the final battle began. The battle was fierce, the wind howling as the creature lunged forward, teeth bared, claws sharp as knives. The bear roared in defiance, its massive frame a bulwark between the man and the creature. It was a clash of forces beyond anything the man had ever imagined, ancient, primal, and filled with an energy that reverberated through the very air. The man, heart pounding, could feel his body moving on instinct. Every muscle screamed in protest, but there was no turning back. The bear had chosen him, and now he would stand beside it, fighting for something larger than himself. His hands trembled, but they gripped the rifle with purpose, the weight of the weapon grounding him in the present, in the battle. The creature swiped at the bear, its claws tearing through the air with terrifying speed. The man fired, the loud crack of the rifle cutting through the chaos. The shot landed, but the creature barely flinched. It was no ordinary beast. It was a manifestation of something far darker. But the bear's fury and the man's determination were enough to hold it back, at least for a moment. The battle raged on, with each blow and each shot coming with a cost. The bear and the man fought side by side, each instinctively protecting the other. The bear's body took blow after blow, its strength unyielding, while the man moved quickly, taking shots, providing support, and doing whatever he could to fend off the creature. And then, with one final earth-shattering roar, the creature lunged forward and the bear collided with it head-on. The force of their collision sent a shockwave through the snow, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The world held its breath. The man staggered back, breathless, his heart racing in his chest. He could see the bear, bloodied and worn, standing victorious over the creature, its form still imposing even in its exhaustion. The creature was no more. It had crumbled, defeated by the strength and will of the bear. The bear turned to the man, its eyes heavy with unspoken gratitude. Though the battle was won, there was no celebration, only a deep, unspoken understanding. They had faced something far greater than either of them could have anticipated, and now they stood together, forever changed. The man's legs buckled beneath him, and he sank to his knees, exhaustion washing over him like a wave. He glanced at the bear, whose eyes met his with the same silent bond they had shared since the first night the creature had arrived. The journey, the struggle, the bond, it had all led to this moment. The bear nudged him gently, as if urging him to rise. And for the first time, the man saw the bear not just as a wild creature, but as a companion, a partner. They had fought together. They had survived together. And now, as the snow began to fall gently once more, the man understood the final truth. He had been chosen for this. The bear had sought him out because it had known deep down that he was the one who could help. And though their paths had been marked by danger and uncertainty, they had forged a connection that transcended words, transcended species, transcended everything. The bear took a few steps back, as though preparing to leave. The man stood slowly, his legs shaky but determined. The creature glanced at him one last time, and in its eyes, the man saw not just gratitude, but a deep, ancient wisdom. The bear had fulfilled its mission. It had found him, led him through the trial, and now it was time for it to return to its own world. The man reached out, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked once more. No words were spoken, but the message was clear. They had changed each other's lives. They had found something in each other that would stay with them forever. The bear turned, its massive body blending into the shadows of the trees, disappearing into the wilderness. The man stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing upon him. He was no longer just a man lost in the wilderness. He had become part of something larger, part of the Earth's great, eternal cycle. As the bear disappeared into the snow, the man turned his gaze toward the mountains ahead. The world looked different now. The vast, endless wilderness was no longer an indifferent landscape. It was a place filled with mystery, with forces greater than he had ever understood.